Less than a week away from the U.S. presidential election, what's at stake and how are the candidates measuring up? Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu, and this is The Heat. The Democrat U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris and her Republican rival, former U.S. President Donald Trump, are making their last push for the White House. On Tuesday, Trump campaigned in the key battleground state of Pennsylvania and reached out to Latino voters.
I'm so proud that we're getting support from Latinos like never before. We're setting every record. Hispanics, Latinos, nobody loves our Latino community and our Puerto Rican community more than I do.
Meanwhile, Harris delivered what was billed as her closing argument to win the presidency in Washington, D.C. at a venue just steps away from the White House.
I pledge to you to approach my work with the joy and optimism that comes from making a difference in people's lives. And I pledge to be a president for all Americans. And to always put country above party and self.
Okay, to discuss the race and more, let's bring in our guests. Joining us here in Washington, D.C., Douglas Sloan is principal at the National Capital Strategy Group. Also in the U.S. Capitol, Adolfo Franco is an attorney and Republican strategist. From New York, we're joined by Aaron Maté. He is the host of Pushback with Aaron Maté on the Grayzone. And Eleanor Clift is a political columnist at the Daily Beast. Welcome to all of you. Eleanor, let me start with you. As I said, less than a week to go before the election. Kamala Harris has made what was described as her closing argument earlier this week. And then, of course, we had that Trump rally at Madison Square Garden in New York, a very big rally with a big crowd inside and outside. You've covered your fair share of elections here in the United States. You're a seasoned political reporter. What is your assessment right now of where this is heading?
Oh, I think the polls are correct that it's a very tight race, that it will be decided within the margin of error. In the 7 battleground states, and the 2 candidates are now, battling to energize their respective bases. I think Harris still thinks she has some room to persuade more voters to come into her camp, in addition to energizing her base. And I think the former president is relying on his stalwart supporters to come out, and he wants every last one of them, which is why I think he has amped up some of his rhetoric in a way that actually turns off a lot of other people, but gets his base energized. And I think that's what we're seeing in the Madison Square Garden rally, which featured a lot of racist and xenophobic talk, and then the former president, comes on and pronounces the Republican Party under his tutelage a model of inclusion, or however he phrased it, when in fact he's been narrowing the appeal of the party to a very small number of MAGA people. It's not so small that they can't win. So I think this is very much a contest that nobody really can say with any certainty that they have any evidence that it's going to go one way or the other.
Right, Eleanor, I want to get back to those comments that were made at the Madison Square Garden rally in a moment, but just on what you were saying about the 2 candidates trying to persuade that sort of last pocket of voters to vote their way, I mean, is that a big percentage? Do you think there's a large number that are still persuadable?
Oh, it's not a large number. The race will be decided by, well, it was 4 years ago, it was decided by 44,000 voters in 3 states. That doesn't even fill a football stadium. I think we're talking about the same number of voters now, and they tend to be what the polls just call low engagement voters. They really don't live and breathe politics. They haven't paid much attention, and that's why every little jot and tittle that happens this week, you wonder if that's going to be what's going to get some of these people off the couch, because they're not really deciding between two candidates. They're deciding in many cases whether it's worth it to vote, whether whether their vote count, whether it matters. So yes, I mean, I think every bit of effort that these two candidates are putting in these remaining days, it's significant. You don't want to leave anything on the field in a race that's as close as this, with such high stakes, I would add.
Yeah. Douglas Sloan, of course, Kamala Harris was late to the race. She replaced the initial nominee, which was the current president, President Biden. Now, among those on the campaign trail for Kamala Harris is the former president, Barack Obama, as well as his wife and former First Lady, Michelle Obama. Michelle Obama told a rally in Michigan, that's one of those key battleground states that we're talking about, that Harris is being held unfairly, in Michelle Obama's view, to a higher standard than Donald Trump. Let's listen to what the former First Lady had to say.
Can someone tell me why we are once again holding Kamala to a higher standard than her opponent? We expect her to be intelligent and articulate, to have a clear set of policies, to never show too much anger, to prove time and time again that she belongs. But for Trump, we expect nothing at all.
So Douglas, what do you make of that? Does Michelle Obama make a fair point?
I think she does, and it was Van Jones on another network that pointed out that we expect Kamala Harris to be flawless while allowing Donald Trump to be lawless. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now. People are nitpicking every little thing that may come up about Kamala Harris, everything they could find, but are ignoring all of these massive issues with Donald Trump, from him being indicted to being criminally charged, 34 different criminal charges, to all of his virtualic rhetoric, being at this rally. They're insulting Puerto Ricans. Now Puerto Ricans are withdrawing his support from him. I mean, Donald Trump really has gone negative in the final stages of this campaign, which runs counter to the common political intelligence of trying to come to the center to gain more voters, and some of those voters on the fence. It really is striking, and I think it really will cost some votes in many of these battleground states, especially in Pennsylvania, where you have over 275 registered voters that are Puerto Rican. And many Puerto Ricans really have taken those comments made at the Madison Square Garden rally to heart. So I think Trump is really making a critical error in these final weeks.
Okay, Adolfo, Franco, a few things to ask you. First, I want to get back to that point that Eleanor was raising about the rally at Madison Square Garden. You know, this was supposed to be the big Trump rally where he was going to get his message across. But it appears, we look at the news media, that it was overshadowed by those comments that were made by that comedian about Puerto Ricans. I mean, it did take all the oxygen out of the rally.
It was overshadowed by the 92% of the press that's in the tank for the Democratic Party. But it was a huge success with the American people, and anybody watching on social media. I have sad news for our news programs. No one's getting the news, nor no one believes in the mainstream media. They believe in other sources that are accurate, and they're seeing it for themselves. Donald Trump didn't say anything disparaging about Puerto Ricans. However, no mention has been made on this program that the President of the United States, Joe Biden, has called half of the American people garbage. They're garbage. Puerto Rico's shadow senator, the day after Madison Square Garden in Pennsylvania, endorsed President Trump. President Trump has more Latino support today, according to the polls, than any Republican in modern history. And among black men, more than double, well more than double the support he had the last go around. I don't know where my friends, they're living in some bubble. But to say that the MAGA movement is a small movement, half of the American people, the polling, indicates that the race is either tied or Donald Trump is certainly ahead in all the swing states. So this tiny minority of people somehow are going to represent the majority of the American people. Donald Trump won 76 million votes the last election, more than any Republican in history, and he will surpass that this year. The Republican tent is expanding.
Yeah.
It's the Democrat coalition that is falling apart. What happened with the endorsement in Michigan with Arab leaders? They've endorsed Donald Trump for president. What has happened with minorities that have formed, and young people, this coalition? It's falling apart on them. Those are the facts. Puerto Rico, that a comedian who has nothing to do with President Trump says something is very different than the president of the United States,
all right,
as Hillary Clinton, calling people who are on the right in this country garbage or deplorables.
Okay,
now, in terms
Adolfo.
of rhetoric, in terms of rhetoric, calling somebody Hitler, dictator, fascist. This man was president for 4 years.
Yeah.
The American people aren't biting him. That
okay, I want
rhetoric, that's dangerous, that's violent, and that's caused 2 assassination attempts.
Okay.
Shame on the Democrat Party.
Right, Adolfo, I just want to get Eleanor's reaction to what you just said. Eleanor, you know, these kinds of disparaging comments that we're hearing, do they go all around? President Biden, he's been accused of calling Trump supporters garbage. We also had another comedian, I think it was George Lopez, who said that all Mexicans are thieves. At a rally, at a political rally.
Well, the comedians and the speakers at the Madison Square Garden rally were selected by the Trump team.
Yeah.
And the word garbage was used by the former president a couple of days earlier than the rally in New York, when he said that the United States is the garbage pail for the world. And so the comedian who has caused the controversy probably thought he was doing well by picking up on the language about garbage.
Yeah, okay, I want to get...
Well, wait, is anyone going to comment on Joe Biden's disparaging comment of the American people?
All right.
His views on immigration are widely known.
Okay.
And he wants to deport, he says, 12 million Americans.
Okay, I need to move on to Aaron Maté. Aaron, I want to talk about another issue, a very serious issue. You know, there's been a number of analysts, many of them have appeared on this show. In fact, one of them was on this show a few weeks ago, a diehard Democrat, who said that Kamala Harris will lose this election over Gaza, over her administration's support for what an international court has called plausible genocide. What do you make of that?
That's quite plausible. Look at Michigan, where you have a huge population of Arab and Muslim voters who certainly make up more than the margin of victory in previous election cycles. And what has Kamala Harris offered them, people who care about Israel's mass murder campaign in Gaza? Nothing, just empty platitudes, and refusing to show any difference between herself and Joe Biden's policy of unfettered support for Israel's, rampage in Gaza and starvation siege. And that's very dangerous when so many people feel as if that's a red line, that even though they are fearful of Trump, people remember that Trump oversaw the Muslim ban. Trump was very fanatic in his support of the Israeli government. But currently in power, it's Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris is serving in that administration. Kamala Harris wouldn't even allow a Palestinian American on stage at the DNC to endorse her, sending the message that Palestinians are not welcome inside of her tent. So it's very unfortunate, because you do have Trump, the possibility of someone who will be even worse than Joe Biden. It's hard to imagine when it comes to Palestinian lives, but it's possible. But yet the Kamala Harris campaign has offered people who care about that issue nothing to go on. And I agree, it very well may cost her Michigan and therefore the election.
Right. Aaron, do you think that the unhappiness and the dissatisfaction with this administration's policy on Gaza is confined to Arab Americans, Muslims in Michigan, or is there a wider rejection of her around the country, especially among young people?
Oh, it's certainly wider. Look at the campus protests that erupted last year across the country on all different sorts of campuses, elite schools, state schools, young people putting themselves on the line to protest U.S. support for Israel. So it definitely is intergeneration. It's also Jewish Americans who've been going out in the streets, groups like Jewish Voice for Peace, getting arrested nearly every single week protesting this. And just last night, as Kamala Harris spoke, there were people there interrupting her, calling attention to the Gaza genocide. So this is a very salient issue. Trump, meanwhile, puts forward people like Rudy Giuliani, who gave a very bigoted comment at Madison Square Garden, which didn't cause a controversy, even though it should have. He basically called all Palestinians hateful and said all Palestinians want to kill Americans, which of course is not true at all. Palestinians want to live in dignity and freedom, and it's Israel that's supporting the Israeli occupation. But Giuliani's bigoted comments weren't a controversy because Democrats are complicit in Israel's mass murder campaign, and they can't extract any political benefit from calling attention to Giuliani's bigotry because their policies essentially advance the same message.
All right, Douglas, looking at a little bit more broadly at the Harris campaign, on Gaza as well as on other issues, has she failed to differentiate herself from President Joe Biden? I mean, on Gaza, for instance, she could have articulated a very different campaign. I mean, there are those who will argue, look, she is the vice president, she is serving under President Biden, she is there to help him implement his policies. But that's one hat. The other hat she's wearing is that she's a candidate. She can do both, can't she? She can be her own self, and she didn't. She failed to do that, and it's costing her.
Well, I think that it's important that you really take a look at what the alternative is here. Donald Trump is essentially said that he would give Netanyahu a green light to do whatever he wanted in Gaza and Palestine to essentially level the place and turn it into a parking lot. Now, we know that the Dems are not going to do that, that you will get pushback. And I understand that there are many people that are upset. I'm upset with what is happening in Israel right now regarding Palestine and Gaza and the innocent people that are suffering right now. However, Trump will be 100 times worse. I mean, it will happen swiftly, silently, and deadly. So to compare the two and say, wow, you know, she may lose votes in Michigan. Listen, if she loses this election, Palestine and Gaza are all but assuredly wiped out. So I think people really need to focus on the fact that you have on one hand, you have some people that you don't favor their policies and you can at least try to negotiate with them, and other people that are just going to ignore you and completely wipe out the innocent people in Palestine and Gaza. So there's really not much to compare here. You need to vote Democrat, full stop.
Eleanor, I want to move on. I mean, there are major questions right now over the conduct of the election. The Republicans are questioning whether non-citizens are being allowed to vote in this election. In fact, the United States Supreme Court has just ruled in favor of an application that was brought by the governor of the state of Virginia, and 1,600 people, their potential voters, have been taken off the voter roll until it could be verified that they are eligible to vote. I mean, is this going to continue in other states as well? I mean, it could even happen after the election because, you know, both sides have said there could be dozens of lawsuits after this.
Right. First, I want to align myself with what the panelist just said about the vice president's position on Gaza. You know, we have a binary choice. This is the way our elections work. You have a choice between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. She is listening. She potentially will move in the direction that these protesters want her to move, and I would hope she did. I would agree with her moving. I think it needs to happen. But if you vote for Trump, you are correctly giving Netanyahu a green light, and he very clearly has put himself on the side of wanting Donald Trump to be elected. So,
but Eleanor, hasn't Benjamin Netanyahu already got that green light from President Biden? President Biden hasn't done much to stop this.
Oh, whatever restraint Netanyahu has shown is because of pressure from President Biden. Otherwise, I think he'd be bombing the nuclear potential nuclear facilities in Iran. So I wouldn't dismiss what he's saying. The fact that Netanyahu is running so hard is in part because he wants to stay out of jail. He wants to keep the war going, and he's gotten a push from the Wall Street Journal editorial page, which sees this as an historic opportunity for Israel to basically settle all the scores and allegedly create such havoc that it will be a deterrent for the future. I mean, we can all argue about that. Now, in terms of the Supreme Court, they've tipped their hand as to where they may weigh in in what I expect will be many lawsuits after the election.
Right.
And yeah, and so I think that's what this is, what this is indicating, what they did
Right.
in Virginia. You know, Donald Trump refers to them as my judges. He's not far off.
Well,
Nominated three.
I'd like to say a couple of words here, since the Republican view is limited on this program, obviously. First of all, with respect to Gaza, you can't have it both ways. This woman, the vice president, has said she has been in every decision, and she has supported this president in every decision he's made, and she's the last one in the room.
Yeah.
She also said on a major network that she can't think of a thing she would have done differently. So this is her policies with respect to the Middle East. They've been weak and ineffective. The former president had a wonderful relationship with the Arab states, reached the Abraham Accords, actually moved our embassy to, which has been promised for decades by presidents, to Jerusalem, so has been a friend of Israel. And I can assure you that Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and the other interested allies in the region want very much for Donald Trump to be president. Now, eliminating a terrorist organization, these are organizations that our government has designated as terrorist, is a good thing. They provoked this conflict, and if anything, this administration has been weak and feckless.
Yeah.
What we need is a strong policy. Lastly, on this so-called voter issue, these 1,600 people identified as non-citizens, and they were put on the rolls. They could have gone in because they were on rolls and actually cast votes.
Yeah.
Of course, the Supreme Court decision was the correct decision. If somebody is snarled in this as actually a citizen, they're perfectly able to go and register again or cast a provisional ballot. They're not barred from voting.
Yeah.
They're just removed because they self-identified as non-citizens, and the vast majority of them indeed are non-citizens. This is why Donald Trump will be the next president of the United States.
Okay, I want to get to Aaron Maté. Aaron, I want to talk about another issue that's pretty big in this election. It could probably decide the election as far as domestic issues are concerned, and that is immigration. It could define the election. Trump blames Harris for the high number, what he says is the high number of undocumented migrants in the country. He's talking about mass deportations, and Harris, on her part, she's talking about tightening border controls. Firstly, how important is this issue going to be? And secondly, do you see much difference between these two candidates on immigration and what they want to do?
I definitely think this is a pivotal issue. Immigrants have been routinely scapegoated in this country by both parties, blamed for economic problems that are not their fault. Trump has spread many false claims about immigrants, demonizing them. I mean, just look at what his absurd claims about Haitians eating pets in Ohio, which is just laughable. And he felt for some reason as if that would help his chances. I don't know why. But both parties are complicit in that they've taken part in regime change efforts around the world, especially in Central America. They've imposed, crippling sanctions that destroy economies in places like Venezuela, which help force people to flee. And then they turn around and demonize the very people that are fleeing the economic collapse that their policies have helped cause. There was recently a very long detailed series in the Washington Post about the impact of U.S. sanctions on Venezuela, where it was revealed that Trump's officials were told by their own experts that this will cause massive migration, massive economic collapse if we impose these sanctions, and they did it anyway. And for whatever reason, both parties are unwilling to confront this core problem, and they're only willing to debate over how much we should, persecute the people trying to flee the wreckage. So Trump has taken advantage of this. He's taken advantage of the fact that there have been rates of crime that have increased, and he's blaming immigrants for that. He's pointed to individual cases where undocumented immigrants commit crimes, and I do think that will help him out. Let me respond quickly on the issue of Gaza. I'll agree with Adolfo Franco on one thing. Kamala Harris and her supporters can't have it both ways. He's right. She has claimed to be in the room for all of Biden's decisions, and she has claimed she wouldn't do anything differently. So she does have to own his policy. And if she wanted to show people that Trump would be worse, she can make that case. She has chosen not to, which I think is not only morally wrong, but a huge political mistake. And there's a precedent. Al Gore, when he was running for president, he criticized Bill Clinton when Elian Gonzalez, that young Cuban boy, was taken back to Cuba to reunite with his family. So he broke from Clinton on a really important political issue because he saw a benefit to it. There's no reason why Kamala Harris, if she wants to win the anti-genocide vote, couldn't do the same.
Right. Eleanor, on the outcome of the election, I mean, I've been looking at some polls, and there's some polls that that say that there are 4 in 10 voters have expressed concerns over violence breaking out once the results are known, that attempts will be made to overturn the result. I mean, how big a risk is that?
Well, the mayor of Washington, D.C. has put the entire police force on alert. I think people are apprehensive, but there should be no reason for violence. We have courts to resolve any disputes, and I think the expectation is that the former president will declare victory on election evening, especially if polls show him ahead, but not all the votes will have been counted. And so I think there's some concern that if he declares victory and then it turns out that there are counts that have to go on for days, perhaps even weeks, or if in the end he doesn't win, that his supporters might be emboldened to engage in some protests which could turn violent. I don't think that's necessarily going to happen, but I respect all of the law enforcement agencies for taking precautionary measures. I think that makes sense. We did see 2 potential assassination attempts. I thought the crowd at the Ellipse for Harris's speech was 75,000 people. I'm sure there was heavy security. It went off without a hitch. So that's what I'm hoping America will respect. The processes of an election in a democratic country, and we carry out our differences at the ballot box and in the court of law, not on the streets with weapons.
Okay, Adolfo, Franco, you get the last word. We've only got 30 seconds, though.
Okay, a couple of things. Eleanor's assessment is always about President Trump. She never mentions Intifada. She never mentions, mark my words, when they lose the election, the Democrats are going to say this was voter suppression, this is racism, this is white supremacy, every race card, every bogus argument they can make to frustrate the will of the American people. I never, during the course, so much for democracy, of President Trump's administration, there was a resistance. A resistance to what? A resistance to the will of the American people. That's anti-democratic.
Okay.
The Democrats will not accept the result. President Trump will win the election decisively.
Okay, we have to leave it there. We have run out of time. Adolfo, sorry to interrupt you, but we have run out of time. Look, thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.